Welcome, everybody, to this new series that we will be doing for hopefully the remainder of the year until Election Day in November. I'm Lucas with Progress Now, New Mexico, and we are doing a deep dive into some of our ballot questions besides the candidates. So, specifically in this case, looking at some of the amendments and maybe down the road, maybe, some of the other races that we don't usually get as in depth with. So, happy to be joined by my colleague Char. Char, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Charlotte Madueño, and I also work with Lucas here at Progress Now, New Mexico. And yeah, I'm really happy and excited to jump into what these amendments are and how they're going to impact New Mexicans.
Yeah, so we're gonna kick things off. Thanks for being here. Thanks. I should say thank you. We're gonna kick things off with probably the premier amendment, the one that kind of has gotten the most press and is being talked about, and that's HJR 5, which boiled down simply will allow legislators in New Mexico to finally be paid for their work. So, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that, Shar?
Yeah, sure. So HJR 5 was it was a bill that was passed this last legislative session in 2026, finally. And this bill is it'll allow our legislators to get paid, ending the dry streak of not having legislators paid and being the only state in that area. It has also per diem and mileage. It has a lot of other things. It has four key things within that, but the main thing is to pay our legislators, and it'll be based on our median household income, which will be adjusted annually based on whether the income in our area rises or falls. So they will be paid a living wage finally.
Yeah. So just a couple things that I think our listeners would want to know off the rip. The first is that if we approve this as voters this year, in election year 2026, it will not take effect until after the election of 2028, meaning that any legislator that did vote for this year will have to face at least one election. So for our House members that voted for this, they'll actually be facing two, right, this year and then in 2028. But even for the senators who voted for this, they'll be up for election in 2028 before this takes effect. I think that's important for voters to know because um, we do technically have the ability to both approve this so that legislators can make a living wage moving forward, but also hold them accountable if that's something that voters feel that they need to do. And I would also add that it just so happens that this year too, that the governor had to well, amendments don't necessarily need to be signed by the governor, but we will also have a new governor in place. And so, by the time this actually takes effect, if voters approve it, we'll have a whole new raft of leadership in Santa Fe by then. So that's the first thing I think it's important for people to remember. And then the second one is, and I think this should go without saying, but let's just remind folks, people should be paid for their labor. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And as we get into this really wonderful interview that we're about to share with you here, we had the opportunity to speak with one of our past New Mexico legislators who served in the House a couple years ago, and hear her story about what it was like to run a campaign and then to be elected as a working mom, as somebody who worked in a job that technically required her time um, in a way that became very difficult. And we'll hear what happened and why potentially, if she'd been able to make a living wage, why she could have been maybe been able to stay longer than she did.
Absolutely. I definitely think that that's a really important story that we need to deep dive into, because for so long we've been just letting it happen and not really pushing back on not paying our legislators, and actually having really good representation from community leaders is so important. And to hear this story on the struggles that she had, I think is invaluable, I think, for New Mexicans to know because so many people want to get involved and so many people want to possibly run, but they don't have the means to not do that, to not get paid for their work.
Yeah. Yeah, super real. So please do stay tuned, everybody who's tuning in, whether you're watching on video or listening. This is a great interview. We were really lucky to have former Representative Brittany Bretas join us. And here is that interview now. We are fortunate to be joined by former New Mexico Representative Brittany Bretas. And we're going to be having a conversation today about one of the many amendments that New Mexicans will be seeing on their ballot later this year that will, for the first time, allow legislators to be paid. We are the last volunteer legislature in the country, which has potentially proven to be problematic in the past. And we are fortunate to be joined by somebody who has some real insight into what that looks like for people who do the work. So, Charlotte, Brittany, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having this conversation and for allowing me to be a part of it. This is something that's super, super important to me, and maybe wouldn't have been had I not had that experience of serving for a little bit. So just a little bit of background. I was working for T-Mobile when I got elected, and I had a 1 year old daughter too. She was just a little baby, and it was so much on my life. It changed every single aspect of my life. It changed my relationships with my family and friends. It changed the way that I work. I wasn't able to continue with my regular job. I didn't know what that meant though. I didn't know how hard it would be to get a job that would allow me to be off for 30 days a year or 60 days a year, because that's when we have the legislative session. You have to be there every single day. And that's not designed around somebody that has to have another job. So then you're kind of in this position where, I looked around me and I saw a lot of older representatives, which is, to have that wisdom in the building is excellent. But if we're only being represented by one type of people or even one class of people, we're not all being represented. And so, yeah, it was super important to me. It also had a lot to do with my my decision to no longer be able to serve.
Wow. Yeah, I think you really just nailed it on the head for us, what at least those of us who've been working on this for a long time. Um, I'd like to ask, can you just give us a little bit of background, like what prompted you to want to run? I mean, I know you just mentioned that you when you got there, you saw what the representation looked like, but like what was, what is somebody who works at T-Mobile, like what are they doing thinking, "Hey, I'm going to run for the legislature?"
No, that's a very fair question. I think that it was less about me wanting to run for office, and it was more about I'm from the South Valley of Albuquerque, and those are my people, and I absolutely love it there. I also have seen since I was a very young kid, I saw the inequality of life down in the South Valley, and just even the schools that I went to maybe didn't have the same resources as other schools and things like that. And then it was also a weird election where the primary had already happened, and so there was no Democrat or Republican on the ballot. I ran as an independent, and so that's how I was able to get on the ballot. So it was a mixture of things, but also me being like one of the very few like candidates that would have been able to run.
I
Gotcha.
think that definitely hits home for a lot of people, maybe some people watching. Hearing you talk about your experiences is, I think, something that a lot of us have in common, right? A lot of us that pay attention to politics or pay attention to our communities, we see these things that we really would like to have fixed, but nobody's stepping up to do these things or not feeling like they're doing enough. So it feels like it's our obligation at that point to do that. But then how are we supposed to do that if we don't have a job, say to pay our mortgage or to pay our light bill or get groceries? it's definitely real. And to hear individuals talk about it that have gone through these steps is, I think, a very much needed point for the public to hear because it could be one of our viewers. It could be somebody that we know that is like, oh, I can't do that. I'm just this, right? Like, if you care about your community enough, you will. However, our legislature needs to care about our legislators just as much and pay them what they are working for, right? We're not working for free anymore. It's equality, pay equality at this point, all the way around.
Yeah, 100%, Charlotte, and thank you for touching on that because I think that I spent so long being very nervous and having anxiety around I don't think I can do this, even though I was already in the campaign. And the reality is that I could do it. And I think that I did really good at it. It just wasn't an environment that was set up for a young mom to succeed in that space. A paid legislature, it's a big start. It's not just a piece. It's a huge piece of it. But there's other things. There's other ways that we can be supporting the people that represent us. But it also excuse me. It also puts so much more power in the voters because it's like beggars can't be choosers, right? Or if something's free, you can't complain about the quality of it. Maybe those things aren't true, but that's certainly the way that we've been. We're meant to think of it that way. But if you're getting paid a salary, then I think that, well, one, we're going to see some candidates who we may not have seen who are going to do amazing jobs and they won't have to be thinking about, well, am I independently wealthy? Am I retired? Do I have a structured income coming in to make this work? It's really, really hard when you have a young baby and you're worrying about all of these other things because it's a beyond full-time job. We're talking 24/7. There's not a day where constituents are thinking, Brittany's probably got a couple of vacation days. No, nobody's thinking that way, and as they shouldn't, as they shouldn't. It's a full-time job. It's an important job, and I want the person that serves for all the communities in all of New Mexico to be the right person, not necessarily the person that fits for the way we've designed it.
Yeah, that's really well said. I'd like to ask for the time that you were there and serving. I think a lot of people think of the legislature as being, the either the 30 or 60 days in the, late winter, early spring, but it's also a year-round job in the interim committees. And for better or for worse, I think best intentions, the legislature moves those meetings around the state so that, theoretically more people could be a part of them. But that's like another added barrier for legislators, especially like, yourself when you were in again, a young mom working a job that requires you to be there, right? It's not like being a real estate agent or a lawyer, which so many of our legislators currently are. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what that was like, trying to, not just the session, but show up for your constituents at those meetings?
Most definitely. And just on that point, I think that's a really, really great point. You've got the legislative session, you have prep for that. So that's a couple of months of your time, and it's during the holidays because the session starts in January. So it's usually during the holidays, and you're just hammering in on the stuff on your priorities basically, and also just the priorities of other people too, the big stuff that you want to know, everything that there is to know. So you're doing a ton of research, but during the interim, you sit on as many committees as well you would like to serve on, and then or interim committees, and then also as many as the speaker would like to put you on. But those are always going to be all over the state. I don't think there's a one interim committee that goes to the same even area of the state more than once. So those are full days. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 days, depending on the committee. But that's 3 days that you have to spend in, let's say, Shiprock, which is a beautiful place. I love the people of that whole area. But it is tough. It is tough when you do have kids or you do have a job which you have to have in this setting. What the current legislators are paid is a per diem. So it's a base pay. I think they just bumped it up. It's somewhere around like $200 a day. So if you live in Santa Fe, if you've ever even visited Santa Fe, which is where our legislative sessions happen in the capital, it's very expensive to live there. That per diem, including your mileage, is not enough to even live daily there when you factor in hotels, because legislators are not given a free pass to for a place to stay. If you're from southern New Mexico and you're making that 3-4 hour drive in, you're going to be there for the full 60 days. And that's 60 days of living without your family and also paying to live. So it's super tough. It's impossible, actually.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's so many other people. I think that when people see on the news, they just assume, I think that a lot of people are able to come to Santa Fe. A lot of legislators are able to come to Santa Fe, and I think that that's a great point, pointing out that, the per diem doesn't even cover the cost of living per day there for legislators. So it typically comes out of pocket, right? Already on top
Right,
of your time and your energy.
right.
There's another thing that I um, wanted to mention is yes, there are the interim committee meetings all over the place, but there's also meetings within your community. So it's
Right.
not just your legislative session, it's not just your interim meetings all over the state, it's also your community meetings where you connect with your constituents. And that also does take time, and that does take you away from your family and your responsibilities at home. So there's a lot to unpack with how much time a legislator actually spends working for the people, right?
100%. And that's where my heart was. Basically my entire time there was I was all about the constituents. And it's tough. It's tough to be the one person that a whole community can turn to, because you do have, you basically take away your own personal life and you adjust to the professional life of being in the legislature. But you do that so that you can meet with your constituents. Because that's the most important part. And within your community, you've got small businesses that you want to make sure that you know what they're up to. You have people that are dealing with housing issues. You got to be there for that. You have neighborhood associations. You've got to be at all of those. Any sort of like community gathering, festival, all of those things. You want to be a part of that. But if you were anything like me, I was part of those things before. And so that's why it was very important for me to continue to do that and continue to just be a regular person in the community, who, happens to have access to some resources that the community is not able to get their hands on.
Brittany, I think I would like to ask, and you don't necessarily have to go into any super specific things, but we here at Progress Now, we track a lot of how lobbyists spend their money, trying to court votes from our legislators. And I guess I'd be curious what your experience was, and and if it makes a difference to you, as somebody who served, knowing, in the past, all the way up until now, because our legislators weren't paid, um, was there a like a greater impact from that lobbyist spending, right? Like, if a lobbyist wants to take you out to dinner, given all the things we've discussed, you know, that hits different than if you are, being paid for your time and can afford to, live and eat, right? I don't know. Can you want to just say anything about that, or?
100%. Yeah,
Okay.
I will say that I definitely see the pros and the cons to lobbying or advocacy, because so much so take the pay part away for just a second, and there is so much information, because there's no cap on the amount of bills that can be entered in one session. And maybe that's another way that we can modernize the legislature, is to say, it's absolutely impossible for one person to, you could spend 24/7 researching and you will still not be able to research every single bill that comes in front of you. And so there is a dependency, I think, on lobbyists, organizations, advocacy groups, and constituents to get information to us. So I think that it's definitely a thing where lobbyists will pay for big extravagant dinners for entire committees, or individually. But I think that we should probably have a better system of tracking whether or not your votes are tied to that. Because otherwise, there's no way of knowing unless someone just says, right, oh, no, yeah, I go to dinner, but it doesn't mean anything to me. And at the same time, if you're invited to a dinner, you don't question it, because you're questioning their motives as well. It's like you're receiving the information from both sides. Everything that you think of, even if it's the greatest idea you've ever thought of, I promise you, there's a whole half of the people are actually against it, and it's totally reasonable. So I think that allowing people to speak on the decisions that they make. So if I make a decision that's not agreed on, I think that the opportunity to speak on that, and then the opportunity to say, like, it would be really cool if we had some sort of platform, like maybe online for voters, to be able to say, this is where the money comes from, and this is where their votes are. If those two things align, then the voter can make a decision on their own. But the fact that we don't make that information readily available or available at all sometimes, makes it really, really hard. So I will say that I see the pros and cons with lobbying and advocacy, because they are much, much needed, much, much needed. If we only had our opinions on things, I wasn't an expert on any of this. So I need the experts in the field on both sides of it to be able to tell me where they're coming from. But I don't need a steak, that comes along with that. We could do that. We could do that over the phone, but
I think that makes such an excellent point about seeing both sides of each piece of legislation. I'm sorry. I think it's important to find a middle ground on where you stand on these things, and I think that's super important. I appreciate you taking the time to discuss that with us.
No, thank you, thank you. And I think that it is important also to keep in mind that lobbying, there's so many different levels of it. You have companies that are worth billions and billions of dollars that can afford entire campaigns around, voting in their best interest. And then on the other side of that is maybe going to be a nonprofit or a bunch of nonprofits that do not have that kind of money. And so it's important, for our legislators to have the right mindset to be able to make those decisions, to say, okay, I've gotten this side of the story, I need to go and get the other side, before making decisions, because these are decisions that affect every single New Mexican every day, and there needs to be a lot more thought that goes into it.
And that actually made me think of something else that I hadn't really considered. I've been working professionally in and around the legislature for 15 years now, and you know, especially, like, for instance, just to use an example, in the oil and gas industry, pretty major industry here in the state, um, there are, about a half dozen legislators in both the House and the Senate whose professional jobs are tied to oil and gas. I'm thinking of a couple of senators who are former oil and gas executives. Um, and so, like you were saying, right? There are two sides to every story. In a state like New Mexico that has such a robust oil and gas industry, it makes sense to have legislators who have some innate knowledge of the oil and gas industry. Um, However, there's always been, in my opinion, a little bit of a conflict of interest from those legislators who are voting on policy that could potentially affect their bottom line. And I I would say that that conflict of interest has always been sort of shrugged off by the legislature, and the ongoing discussion about ethics at the roundhouse, because legislators weren't paid. The argument has been made that nothing is really a conflict of interest, right? So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, right? That again, if we vote this amendment forward as a state, it takes effect in 2028, which would be the next time we do elect our senators. I guess I'm just curious if you have any thought about that. That not only may we see some really cool new candidates that come from different walks of life, but we might also see some better and much needed discussion around ethics and conflicts of interest. I don't know if does that ring a bell for you or.
Most definitely. And I think that this brings up a really important and kind of yeah, just an important topic for me. And it's less actual conflict of interest and it's more about perception,
Mm.
which is something that's so hard to measure. And so I don't know what that would look like, I guess. So I don't know what a hard line would be with conflict of interest because you are voting on things that affect you. Now, affecting your wallet is something completely different. I'm all about less lawyers and executives and basically retired people because as much as that wisdom is much needed and appreciated, it's not the whole story. And you've got a whole bunch of young parents that are dealing with a whole different workforce, working conditions, and pay, and also their kids are dealing with a whole different childhood than kids before theirs. So I think that it's important that we have a diverse kind of hitting all areas. We should have maybe one executive, a couple of lawyers. The lawyers are super important because they know in practice what something would look like and off of paper. So that is important. But we can also get that with expert witnesses. But my thoughts on it are that if you're practicing an attorney, it's really hard to be passing legislation that turns into laws, and it not be a conflict of interest. So I would be really curious and interested in hearing that conversation play out because 100% we need different people from different walks of life all coming together and working together. We see what we have now. We can see historically who's been in those seats, and we can see the position that our state's in. So we could ask ourselves, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And actually be able to make changes and have people come forward that say, I think I can give this part of my life to this job. But right now we're asking for people to give their entire lives to this job for free.
Right. I mean, now that you were just speaking about it, I think Lucas and I are also on the same point. We're also parents. And it is a very different world that our kids are growing up in than when we grew up. And it's a very different world for adults right now
Right.
than when it was for, our parents. So I think that kind of growing with that and it's evolving and we also need to evolve our practices at the legislature too. I think it's super important. I think it is something that New Mexicans really need to pay attention to. I think that doing more is, and it's hard to say that right in a climate like ours right now, but doing more is something that I think the younger generation needs to really pay attention to.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that there's a lot of things that maybe people, just the same way that I was before I was elected, is I was just unaware of the way that things happened. And, I was elected in 2020. I was the first gay woman ever to be elected to the House. That to me, we're a little late on that, guys. That's too late. We also, I don't know the exact year, so don't. Well, you could quote me on it because I'm not going to give a year. But in recent memory, we got a women's bathroom in the roundhouse in the staff in the lounge. So for up until I think that it was like 2013 or 2014, maybe it was 2016, there was a big group of women that got elected into the House, and with that came some changes like a women's bathroom. But it's like why are we so far behind when society is progressing at such a much higher rate? Well, maybe it's the we only are doing actual changes for 30 days or 60 days a year. So if you're paying people then you can let them know, hey, we need you in there a lot more often, or maybe it's always on call, maybe we need to have a session because something important is happening. We're seeing a lot of changes in real time, nationally, and locally, and we need to be able to move with those changes. If we have to wait a full year to be able to even discuss something that happened a year ago, that's that's how we stay behind, I think. And I want to see us be what we could be. New Mexico is my heart. Albuquerque is my people. The South Valley is my people. And I know what we're capable of. I just see a lot of things within the system that are stopping us from doing that.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that because there's, kind of like we said at the top, there's been some discussions for years now about how do we reform and professionalize New Mexico's legislature. Shout out to outgoing legislator Matthew McQueen, who the last few years has really been a champion on like trying to do that, and has had some really interesting ideas about how to like increase the amount of time and access that we have to our legislature, right? In sort of that larger altruistic sense of democracy, the legislature is the decision making body of us, the people, and in years like in the even number years when they only meet for 30 days and they're theoretically limited only by discussions around budget items,
Yeah,
that really means that we only have 60 days once every 2 years to have our voices heard by our lawmakers,
exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're putting so much more power into the executive,
Hmm.
by doing that, because it's budgetary, bills, and also whatever our governor puts on the call. And so then that puts you in like this weird position also with the executive branch, which is an equal branch of government.
Right.
It's not, it shouldn't be so much power, just into one of the branches. I mean, this is creating, it's basically wanting us to not be able to work with one another.
Yeah.
It's designed by design.
And so just to sort of ask it clearly, and I think we've probably talked around this, but just to sort of be straightforward about it, do you think that um, if you had been paid a living wage, a salary to do the job, do you think that would have changed your decision um, to have to leave the legislature when you did?
It would have definitely impacted my decision. I would have been a lot less likely and inclined to leave, especially in the way that I left. I resigned suddenly. I didn't do it the right way. I didn't give the voters, my constituents, the opportunity to choose somebody to replace me. Somebody was just appointed. So there's a lot of things around that where, yes, I also think that if I had been paid, it would have given me a sense, like a confidence in, asking for other things,
Hmm.
like, just better supports.
Hmm.
I would like to see a lot more than just the pay. I would like to see our legislators, which a huge step that did happen is the district legislative assistants,
Hmm.
or aides. That's a huge step because that's somebody that can help with the research. They can help with, drafting all of these things. But seeing if I felt supported, I would have stayed.
Yeah.
And one of those ways would have been financially.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It is worth saying that, paying people a living wage is just a baseline. There is a lot that needs to be done, but yeah.
Right, right.
Okay.
I think that if people, got the amazing opportunity that I was able to get, which is just looking in and seeing, exactly how it goes. I think it's easy to assume that somebody has a cushiony life, or it's easy to assume that someone doesn't. But actually seeing it with your own eyes and feeling it and knowing, um, what that actually looks like, I think that it's very eye opening, and we should do everything that we can to make it easier instead of just keeping it the same.
Heck yeah.
Definitely agree.
I just have one more quick question. And that is, there are a few other, amendments on the ballot. And Shar and I are planning on having some other conversations with other folks about those amendments. But as a former legislator and as somebody impacted by this issue, what would your message be to voters this year when it comes to this constitutional amendment to pay our legislators finally?
I would say that I don't have a dog in this fight anymore. But there's a reason that I'm very passionate about this, and it's because as a constituent, as a voter, I think that I should have more power. And I think that I want somebody representing me who gets paid for it. I want for the person that's representing me to have the time to put into this job that doesn't end. And I want the opportunity to see new candidates, no normal people that don't know anything about the legislature. I want to see people like that. I want to see people like me get in there and be able to succeed and not leave in their first term.
Thank you
Sure.
so much. That was amazing. I also would like to see the same thing, and I think New Mexicans would also like to see the same thing. They would like to see people just like us in our same
Yep.
circumstances and situations representing us to the best of their ability.
And it gives us so we can still be critical. That's what I think that people are like, I don't want to pay somebody who I'm critical of, but it actually gives us more buy-in to be critical because it's like we're paying you, if you're
Mhm.
volunteering your time, well then beggars can't be choosers, but yeah, if you're getting paid a salary, I'm going to have a lot more questions, and I think that every voter should, so yeah.
Getting everyone engaged, that's the whole point.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Brittany, I just want to thank you so much for taking your time to talk with us, and sharing your experience. I really do feel like your story and your experience, I think, is just so indicative of my experience watching this legislature work for the last, like I said, 15 years. And it has been a lesson in who has the time and the power already to be able to do this thing, versus the people who don't have the time and the power but are still willing to try to fight for it, which then just makes that power dynamic that much harder in the space. That's at least my experience watching it. And so it's been very, very eye opening to talk with you and hear your experience. So I thank you again for that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of the work that you guys are doing on this. It's very, very important to me. I also just want to touch on that. I'm very privileged and lucky to have gotten that experience. I don't regret it. And I want to push forward and make it so that other people could get on that same space and do really good things.
Thank you so much. We appreciate all of your insight, and it's just amazing to talk to you and get the word out of how it really affects everyday normal people to want to run for office and not get paid for it.
Right, right. It's a huge deterrent, huge deterrent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Come to my tell all. I'm just kidding.
All right. Well, thanks again, and stay tuned. We will have more after this. Thanks. All right, and we're back. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us during that interview. We had such a great time talking with Brittany. Super, super thankful that she came on the show, and gosh, what just so many like insights that like I hadn't even thought of, and I've been doing this a long time. Shar, what were
Yeah.
some of your big takeaways?
I think my biggest takeaway is that, we have a lot of people in our communities that care. We have a lot of people that want to do something, that want to be out there and it's important to be able to support them in doing that. We don't want to deter anybody to not be caring about our communities. However, it's not okay to work for free, and we need more representation when it comes to picking our legislators. We have a vast sea of people in New Mexico that come from different experiences, different walks of life, and those voices are truly important to, as a collective, as a whole, as New Mexicans. And I think we just need to do better as representation, and that starts with paying our legislators.
Yeah, yeah, definitely couldn't agree more. I was really struck by the portion where we were talking about how much this job, right, being a legislator, it really is like a year-round and a full-time job. I think a lot
Yeah,
of people think of this as being very part-time, that like, you only have to take 30 or 60 days off at the beginning of the year, which is like admittedly, even that's hard, right? Especially for any of us,
absolutely.
who've ever had to work a job where you like have to show up to get paid. It's hard to take that chunk of time off, but then, Brittany brought up that, going around the state for all the committee hearings during the rest of the year, as well as making herself available to be there for her constituents, which is like a really, it's a key part of the job.
Yeah.
um yeah, it really drives home that this is a full-time job and people deserve to be paid for a full-time work.
Yeah, absolutely. They, like you said, driving around the state and then not just being around for their constituents, but there's also so many meetings that happen within the communities that they're in. And so you're absolutely right. This is a more than a full-time job sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's two places that you need to be. And I've often seen legislators on a laptop and trying to be in another meeting, and they are definitely would be earning their pay.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and also, I think that there's a real possibility here that somebody can come from community and rep that and a profession that they represent, like being a teacher, being a nurse. I mean, shoot, even being in retail, like Brittany was. And I think that those voices matter so much. And you've said this a couple times already. And that matters. Like that representation matters. Um, but asking them to like continue to do that job while they're a legislator, we all know how hard it is to do that kind of multitasking. You end up not being able to do either thing very well, right?
Right.
And we've seen, I won't name names, but I can remember a couple years ago, there's a state senator who's a lawyer who had a case that wound up taking him out of state during some important legislation, and because of the committee that he's on, that committee wound up not being able to like hear a bunch of stuff, which stalled out a bunch of important bills. So, in theory, being able to pay these legislators so that they can focus on doing the job of representing us and being our representation in government. Yeah, they hopefully we, be able to get more focus and better work out of everybody, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that when this amendment passes, that we're going to get a lot of new, fresh people in there that are not just there out of the love of their community, but they're there because they're also making a living and love their community. And I think that's super important, especially as Brittany had said, for working parents, for people who have extracurriculars. I mean, these things matter, right? These are the people that represent us, and what's not better than having people who look like us or talk like us or go to the same events as us or maybe not even do anything like us there, because sometimes opposite view is something to open up your mind, but we would never know unless we have the chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. If you have stuck with us through this whole thing, thank you so much for listening or watching. Please be sure to tune in for all of our updates on future conversations on the amendments and other things that you'll see on your ballot this year. Again, I'm Lucas with Progress Now, New Mexico. Shar, you want to
And I'm
sign
Charlotte.
off? Yep.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
Charlotte Mother of Progress Now, New Mexico. Thank you for tuning in.
Yep. Thanks. And we'll see you on the next one. Like, subscribe, and share. See ya.
Bye.